Alright everybody, in this lesson we are going to learn how to take square roots to be able to solve our quadratics, solve our zeros. We're going to look at this problem right here. I'm just going to go make sure you guys understand the process of how and when to take square roots. So the first thing we're going to do is we have a quadratic equation right here, negative 4 x squared minus 7 equals negative 11. Now whenever you're solving for x, you got to make sure you always isolate the variable. So right now we have negative 4x squared. That's a term right over here. And what we need to do to isolate that is we need to add 7 to both sides. So that'd be our first step. Okay. And we get, so that zeroes out. We get negative 4x squared equals negative 11 plus 7, which is negative 4. So now we have all the variables on one side and our constants on the other side. Next thing we do, we divide both sides by negative 4. And when we divide a negative 4 by a negative 4, you get a 1. So we get 1x squared equals negative 4 divided by negative 4, which is 1. And then the last thing we do is we take the square root of both sides. Now, most of you know that the square root of 1 is 1. But technically, when you're solving, whenever you see the word solve, not simplify, if I said simplify, square root of 1, the answer would just be 1. But if I said solve, and I see x squared equals 1, when I take the square root, I have to say a plus or a minus. Now the reason why it has to be a plus or a minus is technically negative 1 times negative 1 equals positive 1, and positive 1 times positive 1 equals positive 1. So my smaller 0 will be negative 1, and my larger 0 will be positive 1. So understand, where do I get this plus or minus? I know one of them is going to be a plus right here, and the other one's going to be a minus. So here, for the smaller 0, negative 1. For the larger 0, positive 1, and I hit check. Alright. So this is basically what you're going to be doing for quadratics by taking square roots intro. We'll do a little bit more difficult one here. Here's the next section. It's the same stuff. Now we're just going a little bit further. Okay. So right now it says quadratics by taking square roots. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the problem. It says f of x equals x minus 1 in parentheses squared minus 36. Now when it says find the zeros of the function, what you're trying to do is you're basically making f of x, or your y value, equal to 0. So put 0 equals parentheses x minus 1 close parentheses squared minus 36. Now what we're going to do right now, and feel free to pause while you're writing stuff down. You can pause it and you can press play. Alright, we're going to isolate this expression right here. We're going to isolate that expression. So in order to isolate that, what we have to do is we have to add 36 to this side and add 36 to this side. So 0 plus 36 is 36. And we're left with x minus 1 in parentheses squared, because this zeroes out. These are called additive inverses. Now, once again, we have something that's being squared. So if we go back here, what do we have to do when something is being squared? We have to take the square root of both sides. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we're going to take the square root of this side, and we're going to take the square root of this side. Now the cool thing is that whatever's in the radical here, you just bring down. It's just x minus 1. The square root takes out this thing being squared. Now, turn on my graphing calculator right here, because I want you to see something that maybe you didn't notice on your graphing calculator if you have one. If you don't have one, it's okay. You can still use Desmos to do square roots. But you'll notice, see the x squared button is right there. There's the radical button. Okay? So if you ever need to take the square root of something, you can just type it in, and that takes the square root of it. Now, what is the square root of 36? Well, the square root of 36 is 6, but once again, you need to remember, when you're solving, it asks us, we're going to be solving for this, we have to do a plus or a minus 6 whenever, because technically negative 6 times negative 6 is positive 36 as well. So here's what you have left. I'm just going to use the commutative property here. We're just going to say x minus 1 equals plus or minus 6. Now to solve for this, all we have to do is just add 1 to this side. Add 1 to this side. I know it kind of looks kind of funny, so we're going to show you guys how to interpret it. It's actually quite easy. We have x equals a plus or a minus 6 plus 1. So how do we come up with two answers? Well, one of them, we could just do 6 plus 1. 6 plus 1 is 7. And the other answer, we're going to do negative 6 plus 1. And negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. So we have two answers, negative 5 and 7. So what am I going to do with these two answers of negative 5 and 7? The smaller 0 is negative 5, and the larger 0 is 7. And then I'm done. Negative 5, positive 7. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do real quick is I'll go ahead and do one more of those. Let's see here, go down and manage assignments. I'll just do one of the more difficult ones real quick. Let's do one more example, then we'll move on to the next section. Alright, so once again, this is quadratics by taking square roots. You see our function right here. We are going to set f of x, which is our y value. We're just going to set it equal to 0. So we'll put 0 equals x plus 2 squared minus 64. What are we going to do? We're going to isolate this guy right here. We're going to get him by himself. And how do I keep x plus 2 in parentheses squared by itself or isolated? We have to add 64 to both sides. So we're going to add 64 and we're going to add 64. This zeroes out. Bring this down. So we have x plus 2 squared equals 64. And once again, once you get all the way to this step right here where something's being squared, how do you get rid of something being squared? You have to take the square root of both sides. So we're going to go once again over here and we're going to take the square root of both sides. Now, the square root of 64 technically is 8, but we have to make sure we put a plus or a minus 8 equals x plus 2. There's our equal sign. And the last thing we do is we simply take away 2 from this side and we take away 2 from this side. Alright, so how do I come up with both of my answers? So here we go. We have x equals a plus or a minus 8, and we're having to do what? We're having to take away a 2. So how do we come up with two answers out of that? You can pause the video, see if you can come up with two answers, and then see if you got it right. So the first one says plus 8, so I'm just going to put 8 minus 2. So one of my answers is just 8 minus 2, which is 6. The other answer is negative 8 minus 2. And negative 8 minus 2 is negative 10. So all I'm going to do is put that's my smaller one, that's my larger one. I'm going to put negative 10 as my smaller, and positive 6 is my larger. And that's it. Negative 10, positive 6. Now, if you're wanting to check these, just to make sure, just check it out. All you got to do is plug those numbers in right here. You could plug in a negative 10, or you could plug in a 6. Let's see how that works real quick. If I plug in a negative 10 plus 2 squared and then take away 64, or if I say 6 plus 2 squared minus 64, you can see that they're going to both end up equaling 0. Negative 10 plus 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 squared is actually 64. And 64 minus 64 equals 0. Over here, 6 plus 2 is 8. 8 squared is also 64. And 64 minus 64 is 0. So both of our answers work. Negative 10 works, and positive 6 works. Oh, wrong color. So that's how you kind of check your answers, just to make sure that you got them correct. All right, let's move on to our next topic, which is, here we go, quadratics by taking square roots strategy. Now this one, you don't have to write everything down. Right now what we're going to do, basically all we're going to do is figure out step number 1. And it says, what could Sarah have written as the result from step number 1? Well, step number 1, she's trying to solve. So step number 1, she's got to take away 6 from both sides. So we're going to take away 6 from this side, and we're going to take away 6 from this side. And 134 minus 6 is 128. So the answer that I'm going to be looking for down here when I look at it will be 2 parentheses x plus 1 squared. That's been canceled out, so it's just going to equal 128. So this is the answer I'm going to be looking for step number 1. See if we can find that. Alright, I think we found it. I think it's answer choice B. Right there. Alright. Now I'm going to go ahead and close that and bring that up again real quick. Alright, let's see here. Which step did this person make an error? So let's take a look at this. So all I'm going to do on this last one is I'm going to work it out until I find his error. So here we go. 3 over 4. X minus 6 in parentheses squared plus 1 equals 28. So step number 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take away a 1 from this side and take away a 1 from this side. I'm going to rewrite what he should have written. And it looks like step 1 is correct. Alright, step number 2. Step number 2 is I'm going to multiply both sides by what's known as the reciprocal of 3 over 4, which is 4 over 3. And I'm going to multiply this by 4 over 3. So these cancel out, and all you're left with is x minus 6 squared equals 27 times 4/3. Now when you're multiplying whole numbers to fractions, it's pretty easy, especially when this number in the denominator goes into the number that's in the numerator, all right? Because 3 goes into 27 a total of 9 times, and 9 times 4 is 36. Now, if you can, obviously, you can use a calculator if you need to. You can just type in 27 times 4/3, and you'll still get 36. If you have Desmos, you can still do it in, you can still do that in Desmos if you don't have a graphing calculator. Just bring it up, just type in 27 times 4 divided by 3. It'll still give you 36. So I'd use Desmos as a calculator if you are wanting to use a calculator. And it looks like he totally messed up in step number 2. That right there is wrong. There should be a 36 right there. And so I'm not going to do any more work. I'm just going to say, you messed up in step number 2, and move on. All right. So, next section. Oh, nope, I already did that one. Now, here we go. Quadratics by taking square roots with steps. This is kind of fun. You get to, like, drag the step in. All right. So, what we're going to do is I'm just going to do one of these problems right here, and we'll finish the video. This is a pretty good problem just to do as an example problem, so I'm just going to do this one problem. I'm just going to rewrite it, and I'll solve it from beginning to end. And we'll call it a day. Alright, so step number 1. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 5 to this side. I'm going to add 5 to this side. So that's step number 1. So add 5 to both sides, boom. Step number 1, I'm going to drag that guy. So 2, open parentheses, x plus 3 quarters. Make that a little bit neater. that zeroes out, and it all equals 128. Okay, there's our equal sign. Oh, it's horrible. That's better. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to divide both sides by the number 2, because 2 is being multiplied to the outside, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2. I'm going to find where it says divide both sides by 2. That's the second step. X plus 3/4 squared equals. Now 128 divided by 2 is 64. Step number 3, got to take the square root of both sides. Alright, so step number 3, take the square root of both sides. Right there. And when you take the square root of both sides, you are left with x plus 3/4 equals plus or minus 8. Plus or minus 8. Now the last step that we have to do is take away 3/4 from this side and take away 3/4 from this side. So subtract 3/4 from both sides. That's going to be my final and last step. Now on this one, it doesn't ask you for your final answers, but I'm just going to let you guys know what those final answers are. How do we take plus or minus 8 and take away 3/4? So here's would be my final answer. 8 minus 3/4 is equal to 7 1/4. And negative 8 minus 3/4 is equal to negative 8 3/4. So what would my solution set be if this was a solution set? This would be your solution set bracket. You would put negative 8 3/4, comma, 7 1/4, if you wrote it as a mixed numeral. Now, as an improper fraction, we have to multiply these right here, get 32, add 3 to that, so it would be negative 35 over 4, and then 7 times 4 is 28, plus 1 is 29, and 29/4. So as an improper fraction, that's what you would see your answer as an improper fraction. As a, I'll say it once more, a solution set. Okay, that's as a solution set. But we didn't have to do that all on this problem. On this problem, just asked us for the 4 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now I'm going to go ahead and do them. First step, we added 5 to both sides. We cancel the 5 out. Second step, we divided both sides by 2 to isolate this expression right here. Then we took the square root of both sides. And last but not least, we subtracted 3/4 from both sides. And voila, we are done. That's all you have to do on these, is just go over. Sometimes you're going to use 4 steps, sometimes it might be just 3 steps. Just depends on how many steps. But you're not going to use all of them. Just make sure you know you can't use all of them. You just have to put them in the correct order. Hope this video was helpful, and hope you guys get this done. Have a good day.